Today is going to be a very brief reinforcement of earnest money procedures, processes, do's, don'ts, things to think about, okay? So you guys that are brand spanking new that are in the room that are going, I don't have any deals, I don't have any contracts, I don't have anything to worry about. You will, so pay attention. It's important, okay? So how do we treat earnest money and the collection of earnest money? Very carefully. What is the number one reason why real estate agents lose their license? Mishandling of funds, and a lot of times it's earnest money. Okay, so you literally want to, if at all possible, not handle it at all. And we've given you all the tools and the resources to be able to do that. If you do handle earnest money, you should be treating it like it is a hot potato and you want to get it out of your hands as quickly as possible. Okay. So I'm building a foundation. Now let me ask you a different question. The purpose of earnest money is to secure somebody's commitment, correct? In the case of a dispute, who is the party, the entity that is responsible for ruling on what is going to happen to that earnest money? Whoever is holding it ultimately is the decision maker on when a dispute comes up. It is up to them to interpret the contract as it is written and to make a decision on which way it's going to go. Okay? Given that scenario, who would you rather it be? Somebody that's on your side of the transaction or somebody that's on the other side of the transaction? Okay, so not to say that there's going to be anything impartial or any, I mean, ultimately, the qualifying brokers of both brokerages or the closing attorney are going to interpret the contract as it is written and make that decision. And of course, there are processes and procedures where if the decision is not mutually 100% agreed upon, it can be a grievance can be filed. There are ways to handle those things. But the easiest way to handle it is to make sure that you're doing the contract right and everything is happening in the right order and at the right speed, okay? So having said that, let's review when you put something under contract and you are the buyer, ultimately you want to get the earnest money turned in as quickly as possible. And ideally, the default should be Century 21 Connect Realty as the holder of the earnest money. So on every contract that you are writing, ultimately you want that to be the case. What happens if somebody, if you're negotiating your offer, you submit it, and the offer comes back and they counter and they say, we'd like our brokerage to be the holder of the earnest money? No. That's about as easy as it gets, right? Why? We would just rather have it within our brokerage, okay? I mean, just do your very best. If it's gonna be the deal breaker on whether or not you get the contract or not, don't know if I would fall on my sword over that. But the reality of it is there's no reason to ever have it anywhere other than Century 21 Connect Realty. Okay. The compromise in that scenario might be instead of your brokerage, instead let's do a more neutral party, which would be the closing attorney, and we're going to talk about that here in just a minute. Okay. If and when you have your buyer contract under contract, one of the first things that's going to happen after you turn in the contract is you're going to turn it into the help desk, and Christina is going to generate something that looks exactly like this. The first step of your contract is delivering the earnest money deposit, which is due by X date, and we even have that the link to be able to do that. Do you have to wait for this email to go out? Say, for example, you put it under contract on Friday evening, you turn it in to help desk, but nobody's going to touch it until Monday because help desk doesn't work on the weekend. But yet you've done 3 days. Well, that leaves Monday to get the earnest money turned in. Do you have to wait for this email to go out? Thank you. You are absolutely correct. The link that you need is right up here in the broker mint tabs at the top. Century 21 important links. You would simply click on the link, or you can copy that link, email it to your client, and they will do the rest. Okay? And it brings them to this page, which is a very simple page. Put in the property address, confirm the property address, do the quick payment. They enter in their payment information. This is an ACH, so it's a pull from their checking account. Automated clearinghouse is what ACH stands for. Okay? So you do not have to wait for that email, but if you can, then it is right there for you. All right? Any questions so far? Okay? If you end up, your client is old school, doesn't do anything electronic, and you end up getting a paper check, what do you do with it? Take a picture of it. You can send it to the office. If you physically bring a check into the office, what is going to need to be coming with that check? There's a little sheet that does basically the same thing as what the online thing does. What's the property address? That sheet is available. Usually it's right. There's a box on the end of where the copier is. That's where you would turn in the earnest money. You fill that sheet out, put it in an envelope, and stick it in there. And then it'll, when we come in on Monday morning, I think that's one of Karen's major responsibilities is to pull and make sure that there's no checks in there. Okay? So you might have to fill out a little piece of paper when you do that. Okay? Any questions on that so far?
Isn't there like an app? I think Ray mentioned it before. Like if someone gives you a check, you can like kind of like send
Deposit it in. What's the status on that,
There's
Dwayne?
a mobile deposit app out there. Everyone was set up with username and password. The vast majority of people just let it expire because they never use it. If you need want access, you can email me and ask for access to the app. You do have to update your password. I think it's every 45 or 60 days. And most people just get tired of that stuff and don't do it. But it is an option available to you. I'd be more than happy to get you set up if that's what you want. But the ACH is even better if you ask me. The online bill pay for earnest money deposits.
I agree.
The only time that you necessarily use the check thing is if you have somebody who just is not tech savvy at all, or in the case of like my father-in-law, I don't think he believes in online bill payment anything. I'm not putting my credit card information in anything.
Okay. So now let's cover the contingency of if you can't get Century 21 to be the holder of the earnest money, then the fallback would be the closing attorney. And I would even be more selective as not just the closing attorney, our closing attorney. If we're on the buyer side of the transaction, paragraph 8 of the purchase and sale agreement that covers the deposit of, or who the selection of the closing attorney, it clearly says the buyer selects the closing attorney. I hate listings where they say closing attorney must be. You can't say that because that's contrary to the contract. All right, and you need to point that out if somebody says it has to be our closing attorney.
So is it kind of the caveat to that then they just don't have to accept your contract if it's not the attorney they want?
From their perspective?
Yeah.
It could be, but that would be a question for the agent that you're dealing with. Okay, why mandating this closing attorney? Well, they've already started title. That's okay. My closing attorney will start title. That's not a problem. Okay, and then you say, well, how do you reconcile paragraph 8 of the contract that says that the closing attorney selection is the buyer's choice? It's worth the question. Sometimes their answer just doesn't hold water, and you can shoot holes in it pretty easily.
So how do you counter that on the flip side if you're on the listing side? Do you push hard for your closing attorney, or are you pretty?
I always use the language preferred closing attorney, but not must be or no exceptions is things that I read in other listings that are problematic. Yeah, you see it a lot, and those are agents that clearly aren't reading the contracts like they should, because the contract language is clearly different. Okay, if you do have the closing attorney, there are two forms that are required to be included in your contract. The F510 and the F511, okay? A lot of people think they know the F510, don't know what the F511 is all about. The F510 is the closing attorney acting as a holder of the earnest money. This is an agreement that states that both the buyer and seller agree that the holder of the earnest money is going to be closing attorney X, okay? As to be contrasted with the F511, which is the closing attorney saying, we agree to be the holder of the earnest money, okay? So the way it happens is you do the 510, you turn it in with the contract. After the contract has been turned into the closing attorney and they receive the earnest money, that's when they sign the 511 and return it back to you and to your co-op agent, your co-op brokerage, with, hey, confirming we have the earnest money, okay? So let's go back. We're going to cover just a couple of the details on the F510, all right? So you fill out at the top. There are no more than just a couple of fields. You do need to specify who the holder of the alternate holder of the earnest money is to be. So if for some reason the closing attorney doesn't agree to hold the earnest money, you need to have an alternate. Who should that alternate be? Century 21 Connect Realty. That would be your default go-to, okay? And then you just simply fill out the information with Moreno and Associates or you know whoever you happen to be partnered with at the time. All right. I want to pay one very close attention to something. All right. Look at this paragraph, paragraph 8. Closing attorney holding earnest money in cash transactions. Okay. Little known fact: in an all cash transaction where the closing attorney is representing the buyer or seller, the closing attorney can hold the earnest money and other trust funds, but in the event of a dispute between the parties regarding the disbursement of the funds, the closing attorney shall not disperse the funds based upon the reasonable interpretation of the agreement. Instead, and notwithstanding any provision to the contrary contained in this agreement, in the event of a dispute regarding earnest money on an all-cash transaction where the closing attorney is representing the buyer or seller, the only remedy available to the closing attorney to resolve the dispute regarding the disbursement of the earnest money shall be to interplead the funds. Okay? So, based off of that, if you have an all-cash transaction, I would not want the holder of the earnest money to be the closing attorney. Okay? Because they can't just make a decision. They've got to interplead it. They've got to enter it into, basically, for lack of a better term, that's the court system, to be able to make a decision on it. Legal action, exactly. Okay, so the one exception to the rule, most of the time, the default should be your brokerage is the holder of the earnest money. A secondary to that would be the closing attorney being the holder of the earnest money. If it's an all-cash transaction, there really should be only one option, Century 21 Connect Realty. All right? Clear as mud?
Is this for both sides, for buyer and seller?
This is most important for buyers, but it is equally important for sellers. You want to have as much control over the transaction as possible. So it's harder to convince a listing agent that you want our brokerage to be. Sometimes it's not a problem. Some smaller brokerages don't want to handle earnest money. We do it all the time. Okay? Any other questions? So maybe this was review, maybe this was just reinforcement. Hopefully you got something good out of it. That's all I got. Let's go out there and make it happen today.